SLAYsmr, an ASMR channel where every week I whisper, about a different horror movie that I love. This week's film is The Invitation 2015, directed by Karyn Kusama. I chose this movie for a very specific reason. It's actually my wife's birthday this weekend. Probably not on the actual day you're watching this video, but it is her birthday. Happy birthday, Susan. She's a Libra. Susan, not that she hates horror movies, but she definitely doesn't have the obsession with them like I do. But every now and then we'll find one that we both really, really love. I would say my taste tends to veer a little trashier than her does. She likes a lot of fun horror movies, but I feel like I'm always a sucker for just really, gross and sleazy stuff sometimes, and I like a lot of high art prestige horror as well. I'm just game for many different types of horror, where Susan has, I think, a bit more of an intellectual taste for it, and I think she just likes smarter horror a lot more than I do. So whenever we find a film that we both really love that's a horror movie, I feel like it's a big win. I feel like most couples probably feel that way, where maybe one of them is really into a certain genre and another one isn't. So we watched this movie, The Invitation, a couple years ago. I don't even remember what spawned it. I think I heard Karyn Kusama do an interview with Bret Easton Ellis on his podcast. I used to like that show a lot. I don't love where Bret Easton Ellis has gone politically, and how he really digs his heels into the ground on some viewpoints that I find kind of... we're not going to get into that. The point is, I used to listen to that show, and she did a really great interview with him, and I'd never heard of her before. They had brought up the movie Jennifer's Body, which I've actually never seen, and I think nowadays, in the wake of Me Too, and just as feminism becomes more of a talking point, and rightfully so, I think Jennifer's Body is getting a reassessment as being a bit of a cult classic, and I think the general consensus is that it didn't get a fair shake the first time around. I remember when the reviews came out, and they were pretty damning back in the day, which is honestly probably why I never saw it, and now people are looking at it like, oh no, the reason this movie didn't do well is the exact thing the movie is making fun of, if that makes sense. It's satirizing the gender disparity and the way women get used, and I think critics and audiences didn't want to hear that back when it came out, but it's getting its due now, so I need to see Jennifer's Body. I've never watched it before. I'm excited to check it out. So yeah, that's how I had heard of her before, but I had not heard of The Invitation, and Bret Easton Ellis was raving about it. I asked some friends about it who had seen it at festivals, and they all loved it as well, so I think we just sought it out randomly one night, and we both loved it. And it makes sense why Susan loved it. It has to deal with cults, it has to deal with grief, it has to deal with psychology. It's a bit of a far cry from, I don't know, House of Wax, which I also just watched from 2005, the remake. So we immediately both really got into it, and so I thought it would be cool in Susan's honor for her birthday to talk about a movie that she really loves, that we both really love, but one that we bonded over. She hasn't, I think, loved a lot of the movies I've talked about so far, though she does like Halloween a lot. I should also say, it's kind of funny that I'm doing this because there's no way Susan will watch this video. She is not into ASMR, which I get. I've tried to turn a lot of my family and friends onto ASMR, and have not had a ton of success. I feel like it's more common to talk to someone who's already into it and you didn't know they were into it. We had a friend over the other night, and I brought up ASMR in conversation, and when I do, I'm always like a little like, am I gonna really weird people out or embarrass myself? And sometimes that is the case, but this particular friend was like, oh no, I love, and he gave a bunch of his recommendations, and I give a bunch of my recommendations, so Susan does not like ASMR, just doesn't do it for, not everyone gets those tingles, and that's totally cool. I do not fault anyone who maybe thinks ASMR is just, not even thinks it's weird, but that they just don't get the sensation behind it, or maybe even feel somewhat repulsed when they listen to it. I totally understand. Regardless, this one's for you, Susan. The Invitation, 2015. Karyn Kusama, written by, I think, oh gosh, I hope I get their names right. Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi, I think. I tried to memorize that before we started. A script from them and direction from Karyn Kusama. She talked about how she was really drawn to the script because of its slow burn nature. Essentially, the plot is a man played by Logan Marshall Green is invited to a dinner party with his new girlfriend by his ex-wife, and you soon find out that they actually had a child together, him and his ex-wife, Eden, who died, and the marriage couldn't survive it, and they've both been kind of crippled by grief. And Eden and her new husband have disappeared for about 2 years, and this is the first time they're all seeing each other. It's a dinner party with a big group of friends. And as the evening progresses, Logan Marshall Green begins to suspect that there's some cult-like behavior afoot. He's just seeing a lot of signs that are unsettling, and he's not sure what this evening is snowballing toward. And a lot of other people at the party just write it off to him grieving and not ever getting over the death of his son. And then he starts to question himself too. So for much of the movie, we're not in full-on terror mode. We're more in internal anxiety mode. And Karyn Kusama said that she was really drawn to that slow burn nature of it, similar to Let the Right One In. And I have to agree with her, because what I love about this horror movie, it's so different from a lot of the other films we've talked about that kind of start with a jolt and don't let up. What I love about this is that there's such an atmosphere of dread and anxiety that is built just upon everyday occurrences. Granted, we do get this opening scene where the couple accidentally hits a coyote, and Logan Marshall Green has to kill it. He has to put it out of his misery. So you have this grieving man who suddenly has to kill something, which right away, that I think that sets the tone of the film. The coyote doesn't have much to do directly with the rest of it, but I think it's a good way to just give us a kind of tonal prep for what we're into. I always talk about with horror movies how I love it when they start off with some kind of burst of energy, a jolt, if you will, even in a slow burn film like this. Although the movie is not about a coyote in any sense of the word, or roadkill, or however you want to put it, it is about dealing with the feelings of grief and paranoia, and seeing a guy who's already in the throes of that have to be aggressive right when the movie starts. I think it just ups the stakes and really makes for a lot of inner character tension. So that's about as gruesome as we get for I would say, like 2/3 of the movie, before it becomes a full-on horror movie, when, of course, spoiler alert, as with all these, when you find out that he was right, and that Eden and her new husband and a couple of the other members who they haven't met before, who are at the dinner party, including John Carroll Lynch from, Fargo and American Horror Story, Zodiac, you've seen him all over the place, that this is actually a suicide cult. Which sounds a little bit reductive, not because I believe in suicide cults, or that I believe in the benefits of suicide cults, but I think all of them view it not as committing suicide, but as a way to transcend and get past grief and get past weakness. I think that's the thing with cults, right? Having never been a part of one, I don't know, maybe ASMR is a cult. I'm just kidding. Having never been a part of one, I'm actually watching that The Vow, which is that series on HBO about the NXIVM cult. People who are in them, they never view it as a cult. They don't think they're being fanatical. They don't think they're being out of the ordinary. Quite the opposite. They always believe that this is something that's helping them and empowering them, right? So you could see how someone could get roped into that, and I think The Invitation does a great job of establishing why Eden got into this in the first place, because she was dealing with the death of a good child, arguably the worst thing someone can go through. And you see these videos that feature the cult leader played by Toby Huss, who pops up in everything, and I always love seeing him. I remember him back from The Adventures of Pete. Pete is already the strongest man in the world, and he was on, I think, Veep randomly, and of course he's in the Halloween reboot from a couple of years ago. He's always a welcome presence in a horror movie, because I feel like he can make the illogical sound logical, if that makes sense. When he is talking on this video, yeah, it's scary because it's a suicide cult, but he's also very convincing, and he has a low-keyness and an earnestness about him, and you can see how that could appeal to people who are in very vulnerable positions, right? Anyway, like I said, you don't really get any of this confirmed for you until about 2/3 into the movie. I'd say for the majority of the film, it's watching Logan Marshall Green's character just trying to figure this out, right? And he's doubting himself just like everyone else is doubting him. He's not sure if this is just him going crazy because he's not over the death of his son, or what he's suspecting is actually true. And I guess both things are true in a way. I mean, he's not losing his mind necessarily, but by his own admission, he's not well. He has not gotten over this death, and he doesn't think he'll ever get over it. So even though his suspicions about this dinner party essentially being like a group suicide are correct, his emotional state is fraught with paranoia and anxiety, and he is probably not in the best headspace, regardless of what the intentions behind the dinner hosts are, if that makes sense. I mean, both things can be true. He can be struggling mentally, spiritually, emotionally, whatever you want to call it, and he could be at the house of these people who are planning to kill their dinner guests, or get their dinner guests to accidentally kill themselves with poison. So I love how the movie can have its cake and eat it too when it comes to the motivations and what's really going on, because both things are going on. There's an internal struggle, and there's also an external obstacle. And not all horror movies know how to do that. I think some of the more prestigious cerebral ones, they know how to do the internal thing, and then some of the trashier ones that I love, House of Wax, they know how to do the external thing, right? So I think Karyn Kusama and the screenwriters just really know how to handle both things and live in both worlds, and that's really satisfying. And I think that's why my wife and I both like this movie so much. I mean, you get the more intellectual, cerebral, character-driven horror that she loves, and you get the kind of grisly, gross stuff by the end of the movie that I love. What's great about the first 2/3 of the film, Coyote aside, because all of the tension is coming from character glances and the shared knowledge from amongst these friends that the main character is struggling with grief, because there's a set of pre-established circumstances, and it is established that things are not quite right in this group of friends because of everything that's happened. The atmosphere just becomes so tense, and it is rife with conflict. And I think when you're able to establish that kind of character-driven atmosphere, everything becomes scary, right? It's not like we need to see some gruesome, supernatural, gory thing happen in the first 2/3 of the movie, because we are so anxious, right along with Logan Marshall Green. Everything is a red flag to us, right? For instance, one of the big things is that he sees Eden's husband light a red lantern, which we'll talk about for the end of the movie. It's literally just him walking outside lighting a lantern. No big, right? It seems like such an innocuous gesture, but it actually means everything in the world, as we'll come to find out. And I don't think it would would seem weird or feel tense if there already wasn't that buzzing in the air, that sense that something is not quite right. It's subtle, but it's a weird moment of horror, even though in any other film it would not be a moment of horror, right? Similar thing with there's a party guest, Claire, who tries to leave because John Lynch's character Pruitt, who no one else in the group knows except Eden and her husband, and of course you find out that he's a cult member that they met, and I want to say they're in Mexico for that 2-year gap. He reveals that he accidentally killed his wife and did time in prison for it, and then that he found this cult, and they don't call it a cult, they call it a group. He found this group, and that helped him get over it. And so, because he tells this story really casually, this one party guest, Claire, gets freaked out and she leaves, and he follows her. He says, "Oh, my car is blocking yours, I'll get it out." So he lets her out, and the whole time Logan Marshall Green is watching this, and as the woman's car kind of gets past the gate, John Carroll Lynch holds her up, he flags her down and goes to talk to her a little bit more, but he talks to her right outside of Logan Marshall Green's field of vision. Now, you don't see anything. It's never even completely confirmed if Pruitt did something to Claire. I mean, I'm pretty sure he did, but it's never completely confirmed, right? But because we are already in this nail-biting, awkward kind of atmosphere, once again, every gesture becomes significant, including this, which all this shot is, like literally all it is a car goes halfway beyond the gate perimeter. John Carroll Lynch flags it down, and he disappears, presumably going to the window to talk to Claire, and that's it. So we're literally just looking at half of a car sticking out from a concrete column. That's it. We don't hear anything weird. We don't see any blood. We don't hear gunshots, nothing like that. But it is still so scary because Karyn Kusama has done her work and just built this constricting atmosphere, like the dinner party from hell that you just want to get out of. Some of the characters even joke about how the evening just feels so LA, that it's like a fancy dinner party in the hills, in the Hollywood Hills. There's some drugs passed around. Everyone's into kind of new age stuff. It's funny because I've been to Los Angeles a few times, and the first time I went to it, I didn't know what to think of it, I was just kind of driving around a lot, and my wife was there for work, so I was just kind of going around to different places. That's the trip where I went to South Pasadena and saw the Michael Myers house and all the Halloween filming locations. And this city just felt so sprawling to me, and I couldn't really get a read on it. Like, every neighborhood felt different. I was stressed out from the traffic. Definitely met some characters there. There's just like a weirdness about the city, right? And I wasn't sure how I felt about it when I flew back to Chicago. But then, the more I thought about it, I was kind of entranced by LA, and I couldn't stop thinking about how distinct it was, or maybe not distinct, but how unlike, I'll say distinct, it was different from any other city I had been to, because I couldn't figure it out. And I was watching that Netflix show, Love, at the time, and which takes place in LA, and it just shows people going to LA parties a lot. And I remember thinking, like, oh, that looks like a pretty fun lifestyle. I wouldn't want to go to the dinner party and the invitation by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it does capture that kind of insular Hollywood weirdness, as the characters even point out. I wouldn't call it Lynchian. I feel like the term Lynchian is kind of just overused. We compare everything to David Lynch. It's not that level of weirdness, but it definitely just has this slightly off-kilterness the entire time. And that's its method of horror. Pumpkinhead has a big giant monster, and it kind of runs off of the visual effects and how cool the effects are. The Invitation is purely off the character drama until the last third of the movie, and when we get the big payoff. So, Logan Marshall Green is right. Through and what's awesome is that the movie sets it up that he believes he was tricking himself. There's a party guest who hasn't showed up yet, and he got a voicemail from him, and so that convinces him that something happened to him and that everything is as weird as he expects. And then the party guest does show up, and suddenly Logan Marshall Green thinks that he is just letting his grief get the best of him and that everything is fine. And then shortly afterwards, it is confirmed for him that yes, this is a suicide pact, this is a death cult, and things are going to get really bad. And from that point on, it's probably the last 15-20 minutes of the movie, it just does not stop. Everyone's about to drink wine that's been served to them, and he smacks all the wine glasses out of everyone's hand, except for one woman. And he ends up hitting one of the other cult guests by accident. She hits her head on the corner of a piece of furniture, and they think she might be dead, and it actually reflects how John Carroll Lynch's character confesses to having killed his wife. So it's interesting. It's kind of messing with Logan Marshall Green's mind, because suddenly it's like, oh no, am I just becoming what this crazy guy is? Has my grief set me into such a state that I'm becoming the enemy, essentially? And then the one woman who didn't drink her wine, she starts foaming at the mouth, and you realize, oh no, the main character was right. This is as bad as we think it is. And from there, him and his partner and one other party guest who survives, it's kind of about them just trying to get out of everything and get out of there alive. And that's when it becomes, Stephen King a lot of the time talks about the difference between horror and terror, with terror being the more visceral, kinetic, action-driven sense of storytelling. I mean, they're under the same umbrella, but for instance, in Halloween, I would argue the movie pivots from horror to terror when Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode, when she finally sees Michael Myers, has to run from him, when it becomes that chase scene, right? That's when a horror movie becomes terror. And with The Invitation, that totally happens. From the moment he knocks the wine glasses out of everyone's hand, it becomes just the game of these three characters trying to survive. And they do. They actually manage, after all the other party guests literally get killed or kill themselves. They manage to kill the hosts. Or rather, Eden ends up shooting herself, but you get the idea. The hosts are dispatched, so you think they're safe now, right? You think these three surviving characters have a safety net, and I guess they do. I mean, they don't die or anything, but what happens is they go outside, and we see that one red lantern that the guy lit before, right? And Logan Marshall Green looks at it, and you just see his face drop, and then you see an even bigger cast of red light just bathe them. They're out in the Hollywood Hills, they're looking out, and suddenly they're bathed in red light. And you look out and you see that there are many, many other well-to-do homes in the hills that have the same red lantern. So the implication, of course, being that this death cult is more wide-reaching than they thought, and that many, many homes have done the same thing tonight, that it's essentially this mass suicide pact. And then in the film, you're just left with them staring out and looking at this. Once again, all this is, I mean, we've seen some actual blood and guts by this point because of all the terror and the fighting, although not as much as you would see in a movie like Pet Sematary or The Descent or something. It's violent, but I wouldn't say it's ultra violent. So you've seen a little bit of that, but the most horrific image in this entire film is just a bunch of red lights in the Hollywood Hills, and that's it. And once again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but Karyn Kusama makes that scary because she's done such a good job of ratcheting up the tension from a place of character throughout the entire movie. That's not the only strategy you have to use in a horror movie, but it's definitely an effective one, and one that you don't see a lot in horror. Once again, Pumpkinhead's great. Texas Chainsaw is great, and not that those don't have good characters. They are good characters, but the horror in those movies, it's not solely coming from what you know of the people in the story. It's coming from external visual elements, things that would probably be scary independent of the humans in the film, if that makes sense. Whereas with this, it all comes from in here. So we're left just seeing these these hills of red lights, and that's it. It's this kind of chilling ending. This second time watching it, I did wonder if the movie was completely pessimistic and dismal in its ending. And the reason I say that is because you're hearing gunshots, you're hearing screams. We know that these people are killing themselves or killing others at these various dinner parties across from around the Hollywood Hills. However, you're hearing enough chaos that you're expecting that not everything is going to plan. Maybe a lot of them ended like this one did, where not everyone succumbed to death, and that some people got away. And you're also hearing police helicopters and sirens and everything. So I think law enforcement is on top of it. So it's left ambiguous how far-reaching these acts of carnage actually went. You could argue that the plan failed, or at least it didn't happen on as big of a scope as the cult wanted it to, and that they're able to snuff it out. Or, on the flip side, maybe these red lights are beyond just the immediate view of the Hollywood Hills. Maybe they're in the suburbs and in other countries. Maybe this is something that's happening all over the world. And if that's the case, well, there's a big problem then. Am I right? Maybe there'll be a sequel. I don't know. I kind of don't want there to be. I don't think this is like a franchise horror movie. I think this is a self-contained, dense, character-driven piece of perfection. And a big hat tip to Karyn, Kusama, and company for just delivering the goods on what is definitely a unique horror movie. That's all I've got. Thanks so much for listening to me ramble. As always, it's super fun to talk to you all about these films. I say it every time, I'll say it again. If you like what you're seeing, spread the word, like, subscribe. I love hearing from you all. I love interacting with you all. And next week we are in October, so it's full on spooky season. It's already spooky season, but this is like full on spooky season. And we're going to have a lot of great Halloween themed films, and something at the end of the month that's going to be quite different that I'm going to try. It might be goofy. I don't know if it will work, but I'm going to do it. I've made a promise to myself that I'm going to do it. And I'll see if you all like it. So, until next week, stay safe, stay happy, have nightmares, but only the good kind. Alright, I'll see you then. Bye-bye.